I consider myself very lucky because I had some very good teachers, which in the life of a designer is one of the most important things. Even though you normally recognize your masters in time, maybe at the time you don't realize that this person is going to be a teacher of yours. But then later on, you understand how much you have learned or that person has influenced you and you hope that they're going to go on influencing you. Stefano Marzano, or maybe for his bad luck, I don't know, maybe he doesn't know, he was certainly one of these. But luckily, I've had more than one, and they've all been very clever, and some of them are not here anymore, unfortunately, but I'm really happy to still have a relationship with Stefano because we met at the Domus Academy many years ago, and then for 3 years, which was probably the moment in which we were closer, together with other cooperators of his, we have managed the Philip Design branch in Milan. But to give you an idea of this, of what Stefano was supposed to do, Stefano had 450, if I'm not mistaken, or even more, people among designers, psychologists, sociologists, technology experts, divided into 12 or 15 branches in the world, from Asia to the US to Europe to Holland. And he had to answer different market divisions, Philip market divisions, from consumer electronics to the medical world, for hospitals, or kitchen, or lighting. So markets that are really extremely different as well, in which he had to move in different ways, but always trying to keep a balance, keeping a connection. And he found a formula which I think was extremely clever, which was, for the first time, I always use the metaphor of opening drawers of what Philips already was. Philips Research is a group with 1,000 people which had in their mind to win the Nobel Prize rather than creating a design object. So it was quite hard to interact between us and them because they were working on completely different areas of research, super sophisticated, super advanced, nanotechnologies, biotechnologies, electronic conductors, so things that are not really things that belong to the everyday world. So together with these people and a group of external professionals, he started to build this culture of vision design, so of showing what you could do with these technologies, not simply what you could do, what was feasible, but also socially and culturally useful and desirable. So really putting design in a position of huge importance compared to these. Whereas first, we can say it quite openly, design within Philips was a secondary function, because what was really important was technology. This was a company which was technology driven, so in which who was in charge of technology was in charge of the whole company structure and the markets. Stefano was able to make this huge change, which was of course quite slow and needed great patience, but was extremely effective in the end, because he created a model which will be an example for the whole history of design and which has already generated a series of people. Last time here we had Mauro Porcini, who was somebody who had an internship with Philips Design. So it was amusing because I have students that have overcome me as their master, and then I have my own master. So there are different generations which interact. And it's nice because it creates continuity. What I'd like to do now is on this theme which is quite particular, of trying to understand how Italian design, which has been created and built and carried out in Italy, because this is where it was born, let's say, within the national boundaries of our country, but for a few years now already has become a more international dimension, in which people, as Stefano, go to work in great international groups, multinational groups, taking with them something of their Italian nature, but comparing it with a global situation, with a global market. So just as now you're here today, some of you probably are Italian, but basically it's an international audience, and you've come to Italy to study design because, and somehow you will take away with you some part of Italian style, but we like to call this, rather than Italian, Italic, because it means that it's not about being Italian, so it's not the territory that gives a quality to the object, but it's the way of thinking, it's the way of behaving, it's the people, it's the way you relate to the world. And this is a dimension we want to look at, an international dimension, but which still pays great attention to local values, to the fact that each one of you comes from a different country, has a personal cultural background, and this interaction makes different ways of living and thinking and behaving interact. So I would like to ask Stefano to tell us something about how much, from this point of view, he had a particular experience, and then there are some guests that have known Stefano very well, but who also know very well the world of design, that maybe I will introduce later, with whom we will interact, asking a few more questions. Thank you. First of all, thank you of this invitation and of this opportunity that I had to talk with so many students today, also with many of you first, not everyone, but it was highly interesting and fun, amusing. I had said to Giulio that for specific reasons I couldn't prepare an actual lecture, but my attention is to try and make you understand some aspects of this Italic world which belong to what I've done without me actually even knowing in a way that I was making something Italic. I also went to search for the word Italic on the encyclopedia, and it's described as populations that belong to Italy, the ancient populations of Italy, of central Italy really, not the south. I'm going to start by telling you something about my professional life. I started in 1970 with some work experiences with the Businessweek brand. And most of my life, as is quite visible from this slide, of my professional life was carried out in Philips. I've also worked in the academic area for Domus Academy and with the Polytechnic University and the various technology university in Holland, in which I helped them to build a design faculty for clever smart objects, interactive objects. And also I cooperated with a new leadership school called Think, which this is their symbol, and then some years also closing my careers in Sweden. This was a team of design that I managed and which Giulio belonged in the most important moment. There were 600 professionals, as Giulio has already said, working in 11 locations, and our activity was not just carried out for Philips. Mainly, of course, it was for Philips, but there was also a part for other companies. There were in that non-conflictual, so non-competitors of Philips, but with the intention of creating opportunities to explore different markets and different technologies and different business models, and so to create new knowledge, new skills, and new opportunities to cooperate and create new businesses which could go beyond, let's say, the comfort zone of Philips. This is a map, we could say, of 20 years of projects, the most important ones. I'm not going to tell you each single one, but the most relevant ones. There's the future home, which is that little red house at the top. We've also created many publications, actually. You probably may have seen Vision of the Future, which was 95, 96, it came out. And it created this panorama of the vision of the impact of information technology on everyday life. And these visions were generated basically with a particular aim, with a particular goal, which was to help Philips to define a new strategy for their portfolio and to make choices on which they could build their future. When I started working for Philips, at the beginning, let's say, of the 90s, Philips was practically almost going bankrupt. So during the 70s and 80s, for bad quality of management, we can say this today, basically they found themselves in a very critical situation with a business area, a huge business area, and a basic inability of being winning on all these different areas. So there was a specific need to make different choices, strategic choices. As I was saying, I entered Philips in 91, and it was then a 100 years old company, so it was quite a critical moment for them, actually. And my first, let's say, activity here was to reflect precisely on the psychology of this company. So I tried to look at the company as if it was a person. And here I made a specific reference to Saggiuoli, who is an Italian psychologist of the beginning of the 1900s, who's the father of this discipline called psychosynthesis. And he created this model based on multi-personality of people. So he says basically that each person has different personalities, positive ones he's very proud of, but some also non-positive ones he's not happy with. When you're brave, when you're determined, or instead the moment in which you're scared or frightened to challenge something. These are different aspects of a same character of a person. I looked at the company in these terms, in the terms of a person, and I tried to make a revisitation of Philips as a person, going back to its origin. And going back to the origin, basically I found exactly in the Philips family this huge desire to explore something new, to create things that could really have a meaning of transforming people's quality of life for the time. In fact, there's a story, which is a real story, about Fritz Philips, who during the Second World War, during the day, used his factories to build things for the German army, but at night they undid what they had built during the day, a bit like Penelope with her cloth. This magazine brought this, trying to look back, brought back onto the surface what was the beginning of the Philips entrepreneurship, which in the 60s and 70s went from the fans of the Philips family to managers who kind of lost this idea, lost the contact with this vision and this beginning intention. The ideal of the beginning of Philips was really to improve people's daily quality of life, bringing light to the darkness and creating medical appliances and really creating a huge area of research which could generate positive lifestyle. The result, translated in terms, let's say, of management, to be then able to create strategies, was to review the market which they worked on, ourselves, what we can do as a company, and what is our relation with our customers and consumers. From a point of view of design, I again revisited what was the definition of industrial design within a company, a multinational company which operated in such different markets with very different technologies as well, and very different products which went from consumer goods to highly professional appliances. And I defined this definition of high design, which probably today is what the Americans from here develop design thinking and so on. My definition was that this sort of design should be bigger, let's say, than the restrictive vision of design in terms of problem solving, which is more typical of industries. We have to do this and let's see how we can do it. I thought that first of all, this should be really, really centered on the understanding and comprehension of people, of ourselves, in our daily context, with our cultural and geographical and economic background, based on research, so with a basic fundamental evidence sustaining it, because of course it's easy to have brilliant ideas based on a possibility without actually being centered and based on something feasible and consistent. It should be also an activity carried out through the integration of many different skills and abilities, because problems that you can challenge as a company like Philips are and can be always extremely complex, and they require the understanding of a certain deepness of this complexity and their problems from many point of views, with many different skills approaching them, not just one. So a designer is not the main player or the only player of the process, but he's got to be competent in his field, but humble and cooperating with other skills, with other abilities which are necessary just as much as his own to be able to carry out this complex problem. And we should also be integrated in the business process, so the relationship with your client is not he's the client and I'm a service delivery, but it should be a partnership for which we really share the definition of a strategy, of our goals, and so there's a participation right from the beginning of what we're going to do, how to shape what we're going to do, a real strategy design. In this, there was also, like we can say, a certain memory, because something that then lately I've been a bit shaked out of, because in July '69 I was a youth that was really fascinated by the impact of the first man on the moon and the comments from Armstrong in those moments with the small step on the moon. This seems so tiny, the Earth from up here. So understanding how much our world is actually small and fragile seen from the huge distance of the moon So it's like putting everything into perspective and really into a relative vision, and to see how actually what really counts is to be able to keep up life and livelihood on this planet, and make sure that we can reconquer a certain kind of paradise where we can have well-being for everyone. So really trying to look at everyday reality which we live maybe every day almost without looking out of our single well, with all our conflicts and all the problems that from this far seem tiny and absurd put into perspective. So really a position which should be from outside to in rather than from the inside to out. And this was also a very important aspect that we tried to bring into our design. From the outside in, always trying to think not from the inside of the company, but looking at it from the outside, to avoid getting lost, as we often do today, in our tiny little lives and our tiny little space in which we move. As if we were red fish that are agitated by a stone in the pond, and they swim around crazily and they're exhausted and they haven't actually been anywhere. This is the metaphor, I think, of the world. We run around like crazy, we're not actually going anywhere unless we find a way to agree about stuff. For, let's say, the shaping of the organization, my inspiration was from the Renaissance man. So multi-skills and different abilities put together. This, I found inspiration in the idea of who represented the maximum Italic genius, if we want to use this word, which basically was able to speak about astronomy, mechanics. He could paint. So the huge intellectual man of the Renaissance, who was able to speak about many different topics, and at the same time he could then recap them all in what he was doing. I think Leonardo, for me, has always represented the maximum moment of this geniality, and I always wondered whether it was not possible to somehow reproduce this incredible mind, this incredible genius, multi-skilled genius, of course not in one single person, but in a team of people who could share a base of values, of common values. So as if these people were all the different elements composing a person, and this person was my organization, my design organization. So in this way, I created, to begin with, the first skills areas which should belong to this group. And let's say the most unknown area at that moment, we're talking about the beginning of the 90s, was exactly all the humanistic part, let's say, human sciences belonging to the area of design. An organization which was not created like a schematic chart or a static chart, but more like a living organism, with a part which was interfacing with the business, so the front line, and another part which instead interfaced with all the research part, and this continual fluid movement of my cooperators, of the people who belong to my team, between research and business work. Basically they came and went between these two areas to transfer knowledge and a continual cross-fertility between these areas. So then we can see how the design was actually structured, the different areas of activities. Fairly simple. There was a part which was completely dedicated to people understanding, and this was a very new thing to have in design. Still, we're talking about the beginning of the 90s, in which nobody was interested in ethnography or in cultural anthropology or so on. Whereas I created a group which should be in charge basically of understanding men and people in their cultural and geographical and economical background. The second group was in charge of going deeper into knowledge and skills and research in terms of technology, communication, business models, and so they had this role of kind of integrating all the different parts of the company. And third area, last but not least, which was what is belongs to the specialized profession of design, was to articulate and give shape to the result of all this work. The activities we carried out in the area of consumer electronics, for example, or medical appliances in terms of product, in terms of market introduction level, so packaging, communication. Also in the programming level in terms of material, finishes, or brand identity. Identity management system, this was part of the medical appliances. In the development of the brand, and the role of the brand also in the point of view of experience. Measuring the performance of the brand, so to have an idea of how much the brand can actually empathize with the market, so how is their impact, and in the end also the creation of new businesses and new solutions and applications which could generate innovation and so renovate business opportunities. I'm going to go back to this. Business planning again, so exploring new application areas, so using existing technologies but for different applications, combination with other companies, other technologies or different markets, so a continual exploration. I have also activated what I've called some partnerships, believable, credible partnerships, not just to develop new products, but also to create new qualities or reposition the brand, the Philips brand, where in the areas in which there wasn't the correct empathy or connection with the consumer, with the market, so trying to requalify and making it closer to consumers. One of the cooperations was with Alessi. This was audio system, ceramic audio system, so with this idea of creating electronic goods, consumer electronic goods, which were not the usual black boxes, but they could be beautiful objects for the home. This was already part of the future home of the exhibition that I talked about, in which the home was supposed to look more like something livable, let's say. Integration again, but of within furnishing elements of audio and video devices, objects that went a bit back to their origins, because at the beginning of television history they were more like pieces of furniture than gadgets, let's say. With Felice Rossi we created this highly connected sofa in which you could put audio devices and screens, and this system was made of modules which connected between each other and so could be composed almost infinitely. Also the creation with Cappellini, when they were still managed by Cappellini, of this idea of going on to bring the transformation of the electronic consumer market again, from plastic objects to more sophisticated domestic objects, so that can be integrated in everyday living furnishing. So more relevant from a cultural anthropological point of view, a sofa, a bed, a bookshelf, and so on. Another cooperation, important cooperation, was to try and start thinking about these objects more in combination with other products. So if shaving is an activity which leads to, yes, satisfaction on one side, but at the same time you have sore skin, rashes, how you could add some element to your shaver to avoid these red rashes, for example. So our cooperation with Nivea, which was important because we created the first cold shaver which chilled the skin and eliminated all rashes. Another cooperation was to create this together with Dow Egbert, who is a coffee producer. We created something that today, okay, we have Nespresso, is super famous, but the concept is the same here. And it was very successful, especially in Northern Europe. The cooperation with the Levi's was necessary to be able to carry on with the research area, which was the wearable technology. So the integration of electronic devices for communication within anything which is wearable. So the theory is that culturally we have decided not to go around naked, so the last part of hardware which we will certainly always wear are our clothes. So until we will have a leaf covering us, I can connect you. And this was at the base of our research to try and find solutions of how we could integrate into the fabrics technological fibers, conducting fibers, connecting, or how also you could solve the problem of then washing, because electronic devices and washing machines don't really agree. So we made this joint project with Levi's to create the first products which had MP3 players or telephones integrated, limited to the technology we had at the time, of course. Then there was a cooperation with Nike, also again in this direction. The first products we created were audio devices for sport, but this was a cooperation that should have led us to have what was the idea of maximizing the opportunity of enjoying sports in a very personal way, so that you could wear, or any athlete could wear, sensors, a camera, so that each athlete could be the center of his own activity, which could be videoed and watched. And so from home you can then be the director of your own sports activity, but also you could do this with real sportsmen, so watch a football match from the point of view of the goalkeeper, and do this from home in an extremely personal way. This, of course, immediately made come up some very malevolent ideas. So businessmen started saying, this is immediately a market for bets for bookkeepers, because that means we can start betting on goals. But then we didn't go that way, actually. And then, of course, there was trying to create new shapes for these objects, because at the time they were very impersonal. So also this cooperation with Swarovski to make these objects more sophisticated. So not just wearable. In this case, it's not clothes, not wearable in terms of clothes, but small jewels or small gadgets. And this, again, to give an idea of a repositioning also of the brand. The brand is like a portal of trust. And so at this point, you should create a huge interest and communication between us and a brand which can give us benefits in our daily life, but also with an immaterial value that should be bigger than the material value itself of the object. So this sense of really belonging to a community, of being satisfied in your need. The reflection when we were talking about this was that actually there's so much available on the market at the moment that as consumers we are all a bit confused by the offer, the huge offer there is. It's not easy to have clear, transparent, direct messages from companies. And so also we should understand that a brand, any brand, has a role and a responsibility and a role almost of guide light in this ocean of offers. You could take on the role of responsible, of partner of consumers, which I have here visualized as a lighthouse in the ocean, so helping the person who is navigating in the middle of this ocean and could take any possible direction, but they don't know where to go, what they're going to reach. What they want actually is to reach a port which should be safe. And so the lighthouse gives you this guide. In a certain point of view, a brand that you trust is a brand which can guide you towards a safe harbor. And in this, we can say that we carried out possibly the first experience of a 360-degree experience cycle. And this was done today. Everybody talks about this quite commonly, so everybody talks about brand experience. But this, which is how it's developed nowadays, but actually almost not realizing this, we did this with our cooperation with Alessi in 1994-93, when we started this partnership and we created these new home devices which were trying to be warmer objects rather than the home appliances of the time, which were a bit medical, a bit cold, very efficient, and with no space for emotions. And almost without knowing, also here we created a project of the experience. So there's the impression in communication, then the discovery through the packaging, the use and the memory. So very simple, but this is the very first idea of brand experience, which was then transferred in a much more sophisticated way with companies which were our customers. This is Securitas. In Italy, we're starting to see it now, this very sure brand. I don't know who knows it. It's a part of Securitas Group, and very sure is in charge of home safety, of security in homes. They have a very wide range of services. Innovation. My definition of innovation and what I've tried to convey into this company, exactly to be able to give a distinction between invention and innovation. Innovation for me is what we recognize as such, as something which really improves our lives. So there's so many technological inventions every day, but not necessarily they represent a real improvement of our daily life. Normally within big companies there is a bit this confusion between a research for invention and research for innovation. And further on I'm going to give a couple of examples of this. One with a very high technology contents and one very low. what's also important to observe, and today when we had our conversations with the two groups of students I talked to, I think this was quite important, it emerged quite importantly. Innovation, which was carried out in the last 50 years, has really concentrated very much on the offer and performance of products, whereas we haven't really, let's say, worked very hard, at least on the last, only in the last 10 or 15 years this has been done, on innovation for business models and innovation in customer experience. If we connect this from the point of view of the investments, we have invested a huge amount in the area of products, product systems, much less in business models and in the customer experience, in which instead we see that in the last years the revenues are actually much higher in the area of innovation of business models and customer experience and much less high in product innovation. So this means that it's actually important to abandon, let's say, an approach to innovation which was basically based only on an increment of innovation. So today I make home appliances or cars. Tomorrow I have to make a new car, a new home appliance, without ever leaving my model, let's say, which is quite strict, quite narrow. So without ever really reflecting about how the future could transform not just the industry that I work for, but completely transform everyday life of people, because all the factors and social events and geopolitical events can completely redesign the everyday reality. So based also on the work carried out by McKinsey, so made this book, The Three Horizons, I started to introduce the idea of working on different time horizons to generate ideas for a possible business. And so we can say that all the projects that I presented in the different homes, in the different exhibitions like the Future Home that I talked about, basically was a vision from today, launched through the years, trying to look beyond a certain number of years, and using this to involve customers, the audience, opinion leaders, analysts, and try to understand from them which of these ideas, of these scenarios that we propose, could be desirable or possible or conceivable, and compare also other companies with these scenarios, which was also highly important because in each company there's always someone who has a vision of the future, thinks of the future, but they think about the future always from the inside to out. Whereas to have a comparison, a confrontation, and so to create an understanding of what could be the consensus of a possible future is very important, because the complexity of the future is extremely high. It's a systemic complexity. There can be a fantastic idea for a future solution, but this idea needs to work within a system, an ecosystem, which is made by everything that surrounds it. And so the desirable future is a possible future if it belongs to a transformation of a system, of an ecosystem. So the projects I carried out were never made just to show a new product, a final product, but basically to try and create an insight and some skills and some knowledge to create a new strategy and also maybe new forms of cooperation, new companies, new participations, and so on. The research, let's say the research part about people was based on forecasting, like anthropological forecasting. There was sociological part, cultural, and so on. Developed into three main areas. So some geographical areas, also application areas, which were the important ones for Philips, and some aspects of transformation of activities, because I also needed to create a focus which was relevant for the company. The different drivers are then should be, let's say, integrated into this group. So understanding of the environment integrated with the advance of technology, the advance of available resources, business models, all integrated together to result in which could be hypotheses for new businesses. So basically the innovation was to have an idea of new values and which could be the benefits for consumers through these new values and for customers, of course. Second theme, to have a solution hypothesis which should be made of a business model, an idea of product, and an experience, and to have an evaluation and assessment of my skills, of my competencies. If I have this business idea, do I then have the correct skills to carry it out? If I don't have them, which could be the strategies I need? Acquisition of skills, partnerships, cooperations, and so on. And in the end, how we convey this benefit to the market. So through which strategies we bring these kinds of benefits to the market where we don't have other channels, we don't have relations. These are the projects we carried out to explore these activities. So Vision of the Future, as I said, was the first one to explore practically all the Philips portfolio, from the domestic activities to the professional appliances, medical communication. These were all objects which were generated by this project and with which we also made an analysis. This was all generated in '95, and much of this was then carried out in different ways in real objects, let's say. Sometimes also from other countries, not companies, not just Philips. So here, for example, we see an example of the wearables, smartphone and devices. Everything that today is very connected to virtual reality and so on. So we have really explored many, many fields. This was the future home. This is a cooperation with Olivetti. With Michele De Lucchi, we tried to understand which could be the new shape of work, and we carried out this project. Again, Olivetti at the time was an existing Italian company which could have had a more important role actually in the world of offices, workplaces. This was a project in '95 also exploring what has today become the huge use of contents through computers. So we were trying to understand at the time which could be the role of a screen, whether it was a television or computer, or whether these two things were going to be the same one day, and what was going to happen. So it was really called Television at the Crossroads for this reason. City People Light here is the role of light in the livelihood of a city. This is a project carried out with Renault, also to try and understand how connections and services could enter the world of transport. This was a laboratory for the analysis of the quality of the environment of territory, so that you could analyze more in detail different areas. From here, then transfer the data to a central laboratory. Culinary art is the slow speed, let's say, within cooking. This was an exhibition at the Saks in New York, in which we did again the Future House in this location. New Nomads was this project which was visualized, and it went from the integration of different communication functions, from children's clothes to sports clothes, to try and approach themes like safety. So, for example, anti-aggression alarms, or the had to intervene for health crisis, healthcare devices. And after this, there was a huge sequence of presentations with different exhibitions of this kind, a bit all around the world actually, to explain these concepts, which were continually renovated in different geographical areas that are also completely different, and with also different leaders. These next simplicity instead were events in which we met with the stakeholders of the business, so partners, customers, companies which could be interested in a partnership, and so on. So these became like a new moment for innovation, a new encounter. Here we experimented everything from new gestures, new light fixtures, the development of what could have been a LED lamp, and so on, until we approached also the research of expanding the senses. For who is working on the food design, you all know about this. These are interactive dishes which interact depending on the food. They create a different temperature. This was a research laboratory carried out with a very important cook, a chef in Spain. This is a product for home farming. I know that someone of you is interested in this field, so how you can grow plants at home. And this is a system that really starts from the fish and the transformation of fish waste into biogas, and so on. First experiments with food printing as well, carried out at the beginning of the year 2000, and a food analyzer, let's say, to measure the quality and authenticity of food, but also to have an ability to avoid allergies, for example, and intolerances. Metabolic kitchen was presented here, so there's going to be a lot to say of each of these. Two examples of innovation, and then I can finish. So the first, still in the area of healthcare and well-being, because at the end of all this process that I told you about, these became the focal points of the Philips strategy. When I started in 91, Philips had 12 product divisions, from LED lights, lamps that are going to health, passing through small home appliances, huge home appliances. Today, with the last step of selling the light division, which was actually their first origin, where they are now is to concentrate on healthcare from a point of view which is both professional and home, let's say, healthcare. So this process, which lasted about 20 years, because in these 20 years they had to make choices of their portfolio of products, selling and acquiring new technologies, After 20 years, they reached this point in which Philips has decided which is their focus. So this is a project carried out cooperating with this hospital in the US, which is a pediatric hospital, which has a leadership in this area. This normally is the environment for scanning, and it led to reflection on aspects which are huge challenges both for the hospital and for the hospital staff and for patients, because in this kind of environment, especially for a pediatric ward, it was really quite a scary place. It was very anxious. Certainly they weren't relaxed in the approach to this therapy. So first of all, we tried to take the child's point of view, the child's perspective. So without thinking about the hospital's aims and interests, but the patient's interest. And in this case, the multi-skill approach in this project was extended beyond design, architects, engineers who are in charge also of the layout of the hospital, but also to the medical staff and the support staff to make this analysis, which we then called an experience analysis, of all the activities which happen from when a patient reaches the hospital to when they leave it. It's like making a CT scan of their hospital experience. You create an image of each moment and to understand where could be the problems and what can be improved. This is the mapping we made. This is the cooperation of the different skills, the different technicians which were involved, because we also worked with architects to modify also the actual layout of the wards, of the floors, especially for radiology, in which rooms the analyses were carried out. This is an example of this experience, so in which we create an image for each moment which is relevant in the experience. In the end, we created this proposal of ambient experience, which based on the pediatric psychology, they experimented that children's attention could be moved from what was creating their anxiety to something else through the narration of a story. For example, children could concentrate on something different from their fear. And so with the psychiatrists and the doctors, we created these stories, which were then put in a card with a radio frequency. This card was chosen by the children following a first experience that they made in a radiologic space, which was a toy model, let's say. So there was a toy model of a scan. So the child, normally we're talking about children with serious illnesses, they could go to this toy area, display area, make a scan of their teddy bear or soft toy, and this would show them on the screen that the teddy bear had inside him something wrong, something that doesn't belong to him. And so the nurse would explain and say, look, now we're going to do the same to you. We're going to scan you and see what happens inside you. And this was an area in which the parents were also involved. And so the anxiety of children and parents was strongly reduced because they would be understanding what was going to happen. These stories that were then in a chip on this card were then projected within the room in which the exam was being carried out. And so one of the stories, for example, was there's a child who dives into water and swims underwater to find a treasure, and the nurse was explaining that when you're underwater, you can't breathe, you've got to keep your breath. And so the child was concentrating so strongly on the story and holding their breath, that this was important, because an exam which is carried out on a child who's not frightened and is more relaxed lasts 20 minutes. If the child is frightened and agitated, you have to sedate him. An exam with a sedated child can last up to hours, up to 4 hours, because you have to have the sedation give time to be effective, and then the child can take out the exam. You can imagine what this means for a hospital in terms of efficiency, even of patients flow and patients management, to go from a 20-minute exam to a 4-hour exam. What this means in terms also of costs. So the result was extremely important, because it completely redefined the environment quality of the wards of this hospital. And the result was also hugely important, because there was a reduction in stress, an improvement in the flow of patients and so on, and also reduction of the sedation which was necessary. So this solution, this design solution, is then also transformed, actually can be quantified from an economic point of view, in a benefit, a true benefit for a hospital in investing in this kind of solution. From here then, they created a Disney hospital in Florida using these kind of devices. That was not my intention to do this, sorry. But we can actually finish here if you want, more or less. I just have one other example I wanted to show you, actually. If this was an example with a high technological content, I want to show you another one with lower technological contents. This smokeless stove starts from the celebration made in 2005, which were 80 years of design that I decided to celebrate, reuniting all the designers in the same location, and to invite the CEO, the NGO, sorry, and together with these, he's not speaking in the microphone, can you tell him? And identify needs and donate a part of this Philips design to solutions to these ONGs that we'd invited. So for a celebration of Philips history, we created a meeting in which this was the Philips headquarters of the time. We invited Médecins Sans Frontières, Save the Children, other NGOs. Can you point out he's not speaking in the microphone? I can't hear him. And from here we, thank you. Thank you. No, Madonna Santa. Ma perché parla in inglese adesso? Sì, Dio che rincoglionito. So we thought that we could find a solution which could be affordable within the Indian market, specifically for the rural area. So an area which has no availability. These are the conditions in which we needed to find an innovative solution for them. Here we made an analysis on the field, so an ethnographic analysis, so that we could have a clear vision of problems. So, and after this, we created a concept of product which could be carried out with very economic materials, with molds that were made in wood. And we created this product which is called Chula. And it's basically this stove. It's a smokeless stove which is being built in concrete and which can be carried out. This again was also a business model in a way, because it could be built by the consumers themselves because it was so simple. So the solution is basically to convey all the smoke out of the home in this way. Here you can see the people who were then involved also to try and use and experiment and build these stoves. And this is how the production was then carried out. See, you have the concrete. The molds were then improved after some time. And the schemes which allowed then to build this business model of social innovation, really, in which the business person, the entrepreneur, is the first one who builds the object for their own village, and then this system is multiplied. And this was carried out with an NGO, RT, which basically helped to create this solution, the feasibility of this solution in India. So I consider this a huge innovation. It's an innovation which holds very little technology, but it's certainly innovation. Just as much is the innovation we talked about first, which was highly complex in the technology point of view. So really, there can be a huge opportunity in business also in the future, even in this direction. So it's always important to remember that innovation is not necessarily linked to a strong technological invention. It can be also very simple. I think we finished here. Thank you. Thank you very much to Stefano. You've said already so much but actually I've invited 3 guests here that are inside what you've talked about actually with their role. There's Francesco Samore, who's an economist but who works very strongly on technological innovation, and he does this for the Bassetti Foundation. There's Rodrigo Rodriguez, who's a businessman, an entrepreneur who's had important experiences with Italian design and who can represent an important part of what has been said up till now. And he's a golden man because he has won a golden compass for his career last week. So this is real value. And then we have Veronica Trevisan, who works for the Locus and Locus Association, which tries to understand relationships between regions and international world, so between local and global. And she also has a background in anthropology, which you've seen as an important element of what Stefano's told us about. So I'd really like them to come here and say, maybe ask at least one question. We maybe don't have so much time and energies left, but if you can wait a little more and have some endurance, maybe it could be interesting, or if somebody of you has anything to ask. Who wants to start? Rodrigo. What design are we talking about? This is not design, or it's a huge way of thinking about design. We've seen here a lection of business strategy, rather, the creation of mega brands, a business model's invention. I'm really shocked, excited, and happy. I only have one question to ask you. You've talked about people and business opportunities. So I seem to understand, I think, and I want you to confirm this, that there is a moment in your mind, let's say, as it's your creation path, creative path, that you, of course, you have a team of people that you choose, that you select, with whom you build certainly a great cooperation, which is that huge added value which teamwork gives. So you single out the weak signs that were coming from a market which was not yet existing, and on this you built a business opportunity. But if I understand correctly, you always kept in mind people, the end consumer, the end user. So a design which was starting from a business opportunity, but was actually really full of a service attitude, of servicing, of being to service of to the population. Yes, this is very correct, and I must say that I probably have always behaved in a very naive way from this point of view. From this image of the world looked seen by the moon that I showed you first, this world that looks so tiny and on which every day as a young person I saw these amazing situations where people goes crazy for nothing and they feel at the center of the world and self-important. So this vision of how we could shape and give a human livable shape to this world. Then of course I have also operated realizing that we could have an impact on people's lives, only a small impact of course, but we could do this where we are allowed to do this. And we can do this within, of course, an economic system which is the one within, of course, the company I was working for belonged to. And so, yes, of course, on one side, my thoughts maybe and my attitude was a bit naive, the idea of creating a better world, but at the same time, with the knowledge that we can't do everything, but we can be players of our future, taking part in it and taking decisions and actions which contribute to this future. And my definition of design was never reductive. I never reduced it to just product design, industrial design. I always took this in terms of giving shape to something. And for me, also giving shape to this quality of life is an act of design in itself. Maybe not industrial design, but basically it's design. It's designing something, it's shaping. In fact, often I thought, not because I want to compare myself, of course, but, when we say the design of God, okay, what does this mean? Basically, this thought of a shape which is not there yet, but there could be. So I always really try to think this at this level, trying to make something where it was possible to make something, creating, maybe sometimes not everybody appreciated this, so I had some problems in terms of being integrated in a system which doesn't always appreciate this kind of position. But I think that in the end, tenacity and determination are on the side of who wants to reach their goals. This evening we have evoked this italic style. In Globus and Locus, by italic style we intend the way in which Italian style is projected into the world through its culture and its values, so not just in terms of national boundaries. In this, we are really finding a growing interest, but also a question emerging, which is, if we talk about Italic values, people ask us, okay, which are these values? Intuitively, of course, we say savoir-faire, good taste, and so on. But in this specific phase, I think we are more and more called to try and express what really distinguishes our way of being. I'd like to understand, based on your experience, for example, what you think really distinguishes the Italic way of being creative or of adding a creative approach to the world. From a certain point of view, I have asked myself the same thing actually. When Giulio invited me here to do this speech, saying we are talking about Italic design, I started wondering, what do you mean Italic? It's not Italian? No, okay, he explained why. I don't really have an answer to this because actually I haven't really been able to explore it completely. But in this presentation, what I tried to show is some reference, really. The first reference I made was to this Assagioli. So a person who really approached psychosynthesis in a new way, trying to understand the human mind in a different way, exploring beyond experiences like Freud and so on. He was really a pioneer in this. Then another reference is Leonardo da Vinci in terms of the global, let's say, approach, the fact of being able of being a complete intellection and to combine humanistic interests with mechanical interests in a complementary way. If I think about Italian Renaissance and human studies and this thought rotating about the man, even though in the Renaissance the man was at the center, okay, of the world, but it was always the human person as an important element of nature. I think about all the people who have been imprisoned, for example, to sustain their thoughts, like Galileo and so on, and all the people who have always tried to discover the world and human approach. Columbus, who, okay, had to be subsidized by Queen Isabel, who was the only one who believed him. But he also was an explorer, somebody who wanted to find a new way, who was trying to understand the shape of the world. He made an hypothesis and he had to experiment it. So I really try to find, in the things I do, this community, this desire of trying to understand how something can be beyond what it is already. So for me, creativity basically needs to be at the service of curiosity, of the need of trying to understand reality even beyond the oppositions you may find and that normally always happen in everyday life. The inability of companies to abandon their comfort zone and say always, no, this was being done already, this can't be done. Basically try to be always the charger of a transformation, the trigger of a transformation. I think we've already said a lot here. I just want to add two thoughts that I'd like you to reflect upon. First of all, I also want to thank Antonello Fusetti, who is creating these events, and for this invitation, and of course you for your very interesting lecture. I also want to start from Leonardo that you've mentioned right now and that you presented earlier. According to me, design, I'm a historian of the economic field, so I have a different cultural background. I've learned through some of the people also here, and thanks to the fact that I live in Milan, I've discovered design, which has often been told as a bridge between cultures. In 1967, if I'm not mistaken, an author who was then Mary mentioned, Snow, wrote this book, The Two Cultures. He was very shocking because he debated between the incommunicability between human arts and technology. Now we know that cultures are many more than two, and that what is hugely important is that these cultures communicate between each other. So design is certainly a bridge. I seem to understand from what we've said today and from what we already know that you are certainly a great bridge validator. You go from one area to the other over the boundaries very often. And Leonardo, compared to this, I think can evoke attention to innovation, which is what I'd like to ask about. Yes, of course, a dialogue between cultures certainly has a great point of reference in the Renaissance and Leonardo, which we still mention because he surprises us. How can he bring within one person so many different cultures? But at the same time, Leonardo really gives us the idea of another tension that we are living much more today than he did at the time. I think you all probably know the design, the Vitruvius man, the sketch that is now kept in Venice, in which Leonardo represents the man which opens his arms and legs to create a circle. This is really the world at the center, the man at the center of the world of the Renaissance time, but he's also enclosed in a given space beyond which he can't go. I think this tension, together with the tension of the man who wants to go beyond the given space because he wants to risk and innovate, this is probably what we're living more today. And I think you've shown us that the design cultures can really help to overcome this tension. This is my question. I'd like to hear if you find yourself in this image. It's quite hard, certainly, to make exchange opinions between people who come from a particular place and are influenced by their background with the continual desire and need to go beyond these boundaries and invent and innovate. So the tension between these two men, let's say these two elements, is very Italic, not because it's just Italian, certainly we've said this, but because it's something that is in our history, in the tension towards the universal world. I'd like you to answer my reflection as I work for the Bassetti Foundation, who works towards an innovation. And we think that there is also an innovation, not just in technology, but also in the way we produce. I'd like to say that these seem abstract thoughts, but they're actually very tangible. When we talk about multiple belonging, today 46 million people are voting to say whether they want to belong to just one country or to a wider culture. This is not a far theme from us. Multiple belonging and the bridges we can create, I think this is what design is about. This is a great question. Honestly, I really don't know what answer to give to this. An answer which could be useful to clarify the relation between the two characters you've mentioned. I hope that I've given some examples of two very tangible examples of innovation which are opposite between each other, to say that we can go beyond a certain scheme. Certainly we can have different outcomes, and the results can be depending on the context in which the innovation is needed. I really don't know what to say more than this. These people here, the audience, are going to become designers, is that right? Some of them will be working for a big corporation like Philips. Maybe someone else will be working for a single businessman or entrepreneur. I'd like to say my opinion as a businessman who has worked with designers, to then ask you which do you think are the differences. I want to start from the definition of design, one of the 101 definitions. A design is a process which starts with an innovative idea to the interest service of which a businessman puts the know-how of his company, divided into 5 phases, which is prototyping, engineering, production, commercialization, and communication. Paying great attention to the fact that each of these phases should keep up the innovation which is held into the original idea. So the Italian businessman is a very unusual beast because he can always speak to designers. He speaks the same language, the same way of thinking, and so he manages to build with designers an interaction which is very fruitful for both. But then he's also able to speak to designers of other countries. You know that in this country we have many foreign designers working. Some time ago I had the chance of working in New York and having a presentation with Philip Stark. Philip Stark, I expect you know. So an American journalist asked him, why do you work in Italy? And he answered in French. Do you understand French? I am an Italian designer who by chance was born in France. So Italian design starts from exactly our humanistic tradition. I still remember when I met Vico Magistretti in a design school in Scotland, in Dundee. A very well organized, very good school. Each student had his own specific drawing table. Every 3 students there was a tutor. This was in the 70s. Domus Academy was just born. And Magistretti was telling that there weren't any schools of design at the time in Italy, so architects became designers. At a certain point, a student, a red-haired girl, said, can I make a question? She said, why you don't have design schools in Italy and there's so many good designers? And here we have wonderful design schools, but there are no British designers at the time. And Vico answered, do you understand? Because in Italy we study Greek and Latin. Having said this, which are the differences? You are the head designer of Philips. Which are the differences in the method and in the interaction between the customer and the designer, between a big international corporation and an Italian businessman? I've often found in Italian entrepreneurs, at least the ones I have been able to work with, because I haven't actually worked very much with Italian entrepreneurs, but the ones I have spoken to, I found that the ones who work with design, I found the Italic style that we were talking about. It's not the humanistic thought of the past or just a Renaissance point of view. It's not just in the design, but it belongs also to businessmen, actually, who have the ability to speak to designers or the curiosity to understand design, and who participate in creating this innovation possibility, contributing with what he's able to shape. And this, from my point of view, means that Italic style is not just in designers, but it's also in entrepreneurship. And so this is really important to understand. The difference that I've then seen, especially with different cultures, is more connected, but maybe this is also part of our Italic style, is more connected to the need of surviving towards an environment which is much harder. So the need to solve problems without thinking too much about philosophical or romantic aspects. The Northern Europe of 200 years or 300 years ago probably didn't stimulate thoughts, romantic and philosophical thoughts, as happened in Italy, where the needs to solve the problem of cold climate or food without the correct technologies are stimulated more to problem solving, to an immediate problem solving, to being more practical without reflecting too much about, let's say, philosophy and other thoughts. Okay, I think we've consumed Stefano enough for today. He's had an intense day, but I hope it's been interesting, and I hope it's been interesting for you as well. Each time I hear him speak, actually, I we've talking about exploring. For me, also design is certainly exploration. And another master of mine, another teacher, I'm not going to say who he is, said that design and architecture was not to draw a bridge. If they ask you to draw a bridge, it's not to draw the bridge and say, "Oh, what a wonderful bridge." No, you've got to try and go to the other side of the river and find the right way for the people to cross the river. Maybe using water or going onto the moon. The bridge is already the solution, that's not the point. The designer's problem is to find a new way of crossing the river. This, I think, is what Stefano has done. He's not just drawn bridges, but he's found new ways for going across the river. This is what's really interesting. So thank you to all and good navigation.